I am going to be recording this session. The recordings are all going to be available over the next couple of weeks. So if you're a registered attendee at the Student Opportunities Festival, then we'll be sending those out via email so you know where they are. If you'd rather not be in the recording, you can either sit there quietly in the background and not chat and not ask any questions. Or if you really don't want to be in the recorded session, you can drop out now and you can watch this recording next week when we've put it online. That's absolutely fine. You're all doing a really good job of introducing yourselves in the chat. That's brilliant. That's exactly what we need you to do. But we also have a fun and exciting Q&A button. So I encourage you to find that as well. And Bree and Kit are super happy to take any of your questions. So if you've got any from the off and you want to stick those in the Q&A now, that's great. Or if you want to pick up on stuff that they talk about in the session, there's going to be a couple of opportunities where we check for questions, and we're going to make sure there's plenty of time at the end to do questions. So get those in, use this opportunity to ask these two all of the stuff that you want to know. Yeah, so we're recording. I've told you all about that. The only other thing that I want to tell you about is the coffee shop. So after the session finishes, we have an online space available. It's a Google Hangout. It's not actually as exciting as a coffee shop, but we've called it a coffee shop to make it sound fun and nice. But basically, it's an informal space for you to go after the session and have a chat with other people who are in this one and talk about what you learn and what you found interesting. Kit and Bree are welcome to join that as well, but I'm not sure what they've got on after this. They may be having a busy Sunday, but I'll drop the link to that in towards the end of the session so we can make sure that you can join that. So yeah, use the Q&A, use the chat, and I'll hand over and I'll share the screen in a second and you can introduce yourselves.
Amazing. Thanks, Rosie. I'm Kit, and this is Bree. There's our Twitter accounts. Thank you so much for giving up what is a really nice sunny Sunday here in Horsham. I don't know, how is it where you are, Bree?
It's very nice, to be honest. I'm in the sort of sleepy North London suburbs, still living with my mum, who I'm told may be bringing an iced coffee in halfway through. So if you see the it's deliberate.
What a treat. Yeah, it's very nice here. Now, we've got quite limited time, haven't we? So we might as well just crack on and sort of rattle through things. So me and Bree are both going to introduce ourselves just at the beginning, just to give you a bit of an idea of who we are, how we know each other, what we did at uni. I've recently moved house and my internet is terrible out in the sticks. So if I drop off, it might just be a 50-minute session with Aubrey. So you're in safe hands. So first of all, my name's Kip Bradshaw. I'm a journalist at Sky News. I've been there 4 years and 1 day. Yesterday was my 4-year anniversary at Sky. And my mum was like, did you get a certificate? I was like, no, we don't get certificates, Mum. Each year we're there, but that would be lovely. I went to Sussex Uni back in 2009 to 2012. I studied politics down there. And while I was at Sussex, I got involved in, oh, thank you for the happy work anniversary, Mila. Appreciate it. While I was there, I was involved in quite a bit of student media, mostly student radio. So the student radio station down there at Sussex URF. But I also did a bit at Uni TV and the paper there. I wrote a few articles for the paper in my first and second year. The paper there called The Badger. And then since leaving Sussex, I stayed on for a year as the elected sabbatical officer, the communications officer, which was kind of in charge of all the union's communications and sort of had some kind of responsibility for student media as well. And then since leaving, I worked in comms for a bit. I've worked in 2 press office roles, both for the NHS and the police. And then I went into journalism and I did a postgrad journalism MA at City University in London. And then after that, started working at Sky. And like I say, I've been there for the past 4 years. So that's my CV in a minute. That's where I am. That brings us up to the present day. Aubrey, what about you?
So mine and Kit's paths have followed quite a similar route, given that we went to the same university. although I was sort of slightly later. So I was there from 2011 till 2014. And my sort of experience was very much print and digital focused. So I was a news editor and then editor-in-chief of the newspaper there, the Badger, whereas Kit's experience predominantly was the other two sort of broadcast sides. So hopefully we'll sort of be able to cover a lot of bases. I did an NCTJ straight after coming out of uni, and then managed to get a job at the Huffington Post for 2 years as a news reporter. I always had really sort of wanted to specialise in politics though, so I sort of got the chance to do that by doing some paternity leave cover for a colleague in the lobby. And after I'd done that, that sort of gave me a springboard to be able to go to Sky to do political reporting for their website, which mostly sort of involves writing stories and doing live blogs. And yeah, that is pretty much my sort of career to date. And yeah.
I should have probably said, my internet's just gone terrible, I think, but I should have probably said that at the student radio station, I was head of news and then chair. They had a chair of our student radio station, which I don't think many other student radio stations do, but I was chair, sat in the chair there. Great. So first sort of subheading, we've kind of divided it into questions and things, is sort of some tips that we had for while you're involved in student media. Just looking at the chat, it looks like most of you guys have been quite heavily involved in student media. So you're either coming to the end of your time, you're outgoing kind of editors, or you're heavily involved, which is great. So, but some of this might not apply as much for you. But our sort of first tip was really kind of try. Student media is a great opportunity to try before you buy, because it's one of the only opportunities you'll probably get to sample so many different types of media outlet. You know, the fact that you can have your own radio show, you can do a bit of presenting on the TV station, you can write articles for the paper or for the online, you know, publication magazine. So it's a really good opportunity to learn about those, or how those different media outlets work, and develop those skills as well. Because as I'm sure you guys know, kind of broadcast media is very different to print media. And even at an organisation like Sky, how we write stuff for the website is very different to how we write stuff for TV and for radio. So it's a really, really good opportunity to kind of get a lot of experience. And increasingly, media outlets are multi-platform. So you will need a lot of different skills. So I guess there's two advantages of trying as much as you can from the different media outlets. One, you get a sense of what you prefer, what you enjoy. After sort of my first year, decided I really liked the radio side of things. So that's why I sort of stuck at that. But also you're learning really important skills, and you're developing your skill base in terms of all those different media outlets. And particularly now, digital media, social media, TikTok. Have you got a TikTok account, Bree?
I do actually, yeah. I don't really use it for, like, you know, creating content, but for consuming. I sort of did a webinar a couple of weeks ago on like loads of investigative stuff you can do on there. It's really interesting, actually. That
must be the difference between a 2012 graduate and a 14? That must be the difference. I still haven't got an account. I only see TikToks on Twitter. That's obviously a generational thing. But yeah, developing those skills of those different media outlets is really important as well. What do you think, Bree, about that kind of balance between trying to get as much experience of different media outlets at uni, but also finding the one that you really enjoy?
I think one of my biggest regrets was not getting involved more in the other ones. Before today, I went back on Facebook and managed to find like my group chat with all the editors from 2014. And it was the sort of summer before when we were sort of like really kind of, I think the word I probably use is like idealistic. We were like, it's going to be the best product that has ever been made by any student anywhere in the world. And it's going to be so interactive, and we're going to have, you know, embeds from the TV station and podcasts, you know, from the radio station and stuff like that. And I really wish that we'd sort of managed to keep that momentum. And there's no real reason that we didn't, other than the fact that sort of just life got in the way. And we were a weekly paper producing, I think, 20 or 22 pages. So there was quite a lot of demand. I know that a lot of campuses nowadays are down to sort of bi-weekly or sort of even just a couple of issues a term. So I do kind of wish that we'd stuck to that path that we'd trodden out, and it would have just given me a much broader experience, because you sort of realise as soon as you graduate that, like, we're all in this position, we're all going to have degrees by the end of it. What's going to set you apart is very much like how interdisciplinary you can be, and all of the like different skills that you have to put together. And now everyone is just, you know, a multimedia reporter, and you're sort of just expected to be able to kind of do everything, and you need to be able to sell yourself like that. So try doing more of experimenting with different types of student media, and, you know, essentially getting access to stuff that, you know, again, I was looking through our old minutes and stuff and looking at the cost of like studio equipment and things like that. You know, it's just such a huge advantage to be able to do that kind of thing. And I think, you know, like, you'll become a better writer through like doing radio shows and just sort of learning how to speak a little bit more eloquently. So any, you know, just as broad a spectrum of media as you can possibly do is really, really great.
And I remember when we were prepping for this, Bree, you sort of mentioned that you felt like at uni, it was a bit like you were majoring in the subjects that you were actually studying and minoring in media. I thought that was really a really interesting kind of analogy. Yeah,
I guess it's different for everyone, but I mean, it's maybe almost the other way around for me, because I put like student media sort of before my subject, although not too much to the detriment of it. I still came out with the 2-1. It was just like, scrape the 60%. 60% is the same as 69%. It's fine. But yeah, I think it's quite nice to have that sort of like, you know, depending on how much you love it, it's kind of like you're studying it as a sort of minor versus the major actual subject that you are there to do.
And we both did non-journalism subjects as our undergraduate. Yeah. Do you ever think about, oh, I should have studied journalism as a degree undergrad-wise?
Not for me personally, just because I knew what I wanted my specialism to be. I wanted it to be politics, and that was what my degree was in. So, I had a quite firm idea of what I wanted to do, and luckily it sort of panned out, and I was able to get a job doing that specific thing. So, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of student media, depending where you do your undergrad, is that you can do so much student media experience while studying a different subject. So I don't regret that at all. And it turns out we actually both did some form of postgrad journalism qualification anyway. So you can kind of really study a different subject and do lots of student media. And then if you need to, get a postgrad journalism qualification. Okay, cool. So making your mark was our next subheading.
Sort of weird when we write it like that, isn't
it? Sounded a bit Partridge when I just read it out like that. Make your mark. But yeah, consider running for exec positions. So we both, obviously, by maybe our second year, had settled on you, the Badger, the student paper, me, URF, and student radio. Were you already a news editor come your second year?
Yeah, I was news editor second year, editor third.
So you were news editor. I was head of news at URF. You were news editor. And I guess my thoughts on this is if you do decide to specialise, obviously we've talked about the pros and cons of generalising and specialising, but if you choose to specialise, you can get loads of skills by being on the exec of a student media outlet. That's how I feel anyway. So I was head of news and then chair. I mean, the big skills that I think you learn over just contributing to a student media outlet is you learn kind of, you know, lots of teamwork skills and kind of, yeah, teamwork, working together, management skills, and you get training opportunities. So Rosie was just saying just before we started that the media law session in this festival was one of the most popular sessions. And you know, you might get media law training if you're on an exec position. We went for one away day, I seem to remember, at the Argus, the local paper at Brighton, and did a media law session. So there's loads of skills there. And you, of course, get to go to conferences like the Student Radio Conference. How about you, Bree? You obviously got a lot out of your time on exec?
Yeah, I think my greatest problem was that, you know, we spent sort of too long just kind of doing the day-to-day stuff and basically doing like the managerial aspects of it, which are really, really important, especially if you are so invested in producing like a really high quality product, that you actually end up like neglecting the writing side of things. So it was a really good experience in terms of like management, if that's not too sort of grand a way to call it, although there was a team of about 30, so, you know, and we were weekly, so it was pretty substantial. But I think that not losing that focus on like what you are there to do, which is ultimately like hone your skills as a writer and build a portfolio, so that when you actually come to apply for jobs, those two things are like pretty ready. So the exec stuff is important, and I think it really helps to like, you know, have a sort of exec position or something, so you can go and network with other people. You know, it's something to put on your CV. It does sound really good, but you absolutely don't sort of need it. Actually, some of the best people just sort of stayed writers, and they just focused on the writing, and they managed to produce a lot higher content because that was just what they were focused on.
There's definitely, I think that's a really good point about not getting lost in the weeds of managing a student society. Obviously you want to do the best job you can in charge of that paper or that station, but yeah, you've got to remember about, you know, it's also, you've not got to, yeah, don't forget about you as a potential journalist if you do want to go into journalism afterwards. Because if you could be doing a great job showcasing everyone else's journalism as editor of the paper, not doing much yourself. Okay, so next sort of subsection, we'll try and rattle through these because there's loads of questions, as Breeze just pointed out to me. So we'll try and answer as many of your questions as we can and sort of rattle through our slides. But the next one kind of links on to what I was just saying there about not getting lost in the exec brief and the fact that actually you want to be able to produce some standout content yourself and build your online portfolio. I regret, I think, not building my online portfolio as I went, and then you suddenly at the end of 3 years of student media and you're like, oh, what are all those articles I wrote for the Badger? I can't even find them. And sort of that idea of building your online portfolio as you go, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on some of these special kind of websites for showcasing online work, and actually keeping a log of that, and even just keeping URLs or screenshots if papers and stuff delete the original articles or rename who wrote them and stuff, you know, keeping that, downloading audio if you did stuff on radio, downloading TV clips. So that's my big thing about that, you know, try and do some great original journalism and standout content, but actually do it as you go. I don't know if what you think about that, Brie.
Yeah, definitely echo the download your own articles, because, you know, hosting just sort of dies. I'm sure that I've tried to access like old articles of mine on the Badger that no longer exist. And the other thing that I'd sort of tag onto this, which is slightly tangentially related, is like contacts. Like if I'd saved all of the sort of contacts, you know, that I'd made, like numbers and emails and stuff at uni before I'd lost my uni email address, then it would have put me ahead, because actually you just never know when you're going to need a story about like some random counsellor in Brighton who's said something incredibly racist, and you actually did happen to speak to them 6 years ago and you've got their number, instead of sort of chasing them. The only other thing was basically I just wrote, you know, it's better to have sort of 5 standout pieces than 100 mediocre ones. Just sort of do your research. You know, there are sort of fewer student journalism awards now than there used to be, but like it doesn't hurt if you can sort of think with that mentality at the start of the academic year and be like, right, these are the sort of ones that I want to go for. Like I'm going to sort of specifically produce content that I think I could enter into these things, and just be a little bit more mindful about like, yeah, making sure that you actually produce some sort of standout pieces rather than getting wrapped up in the day-to-day, month-to-month process, because, you know, you click fingers and the whole year's gone.
That was our next slide, actually. We might as well do it now before we pause for questions. But yeah, consider entering awards. I don't know. So I entered the SRA awards and for a journalism thing I did at the radio station, and won that, which was great. But you were saying that you know someone who's actually collates a list of all the different student awards, which sounds really cool.
It is exceptionally cool. I'm literally dropping the link into the chat right now. So this is like a free sort of resource website that's actually run by a friend who's a freelance sort of journalist. And and she actually won like a press award for sort of setting this website up. But one of the amazing things that she does is she's created literally like a complete list of all the student awards that she's ever sort of been able to find, and there are, we're sort of nudging like 50 on here, so there's loads. Some of them are international, some of them domestic, but they're also ordered by when they close. So at the top of the page now you'll have all the ones in July, so you'll be able to sort of like see which ones close when, which is good if you're sort of trying to get a last minute nomination in. But that is a resource that exists now that if it had existed a few years ago, I definitely would have made full use of.
And the thing about awards is it's not actually the best, if there's an award for the best radio show, it's not the best student radio show. It's the best student radio show that bothered to get their award nomination in. So that's the mindset. You almost need to have that mindset that, don't think, I can't win this, because if someone else wins by default and you are better than them, then you should have won the award. So if you don't enter, you can't win, basically. So I think that kind of resource is great, Brie, because it just allows you to blitz your awards entries and get them all in. Yeah. I made some great contacts from winning that SRA award, and then after City I entered our final project into awards and won some then, so I really, really recommend it. Should we have a bit of a pause for questions now? Sounds like a good midway point. Rosie was offering to sort of moderate, but I know we can see them as well. What's the best thing to do, Rosie?
I'll moderate. I'm going to stop sharing because it's nice to see your full faces while we chat through. You've had tons, so thankfully people have been using the upvote button, so it makes it a bit easier for me to sort them out. So the first one from anonymous attendee is, how did you get your work experience? Any tips for sourcing placements?
That is a very good question. Work experience is really tough, isn't it? Especially, I remember for my whole time at Sussex, I don't know about you, Brie, but twice a year or whenever the BBC work experience applications opened, I applied, never got one. And I think that's an example of a sort of very formal process, which thousands of people apply for. And it's a needle in a haystack kind of stuff in terms of getting that opportunity. Whereas some of the best work experience I've done was, calling up the Heart News desk in Brighton and speaking to the news editor there, and him saying, come in next week for a couple of days and we'll show you what we do. And then having that contact to do freelance work at Heart, which was the local station down there when I was at Sussex. So I've always found it a lot easier approaching people directly. Now, sometimes they'll say, we've got formal processes, you've got to go and apply in 6 months' time. And that's like, okay, thanks, I'll do that. But actually being persistent and just approaching, trying to find out directly who's in charge of that decision, I've always found a lot easier. Don't know about you, Brie.
The short answer is, it's not very easy. I think the best way is to, chat to your peers and sort of, they're going to be pursuing the same kind of things, and ask them for contact details and just be incredibly dogged and unashamed about it. It's a big first step. You don't have to do it at all, but it does really help. It definitely, in my case, led to like my first 2 jobs in journalism. Just a week. I'm not talking about placements or internships or anything totally exploitative. It was just a week. Just like ask around your friends. Ask. There's look at that website I sent you, the forum, the Student Publication Association. There's like a Facebook group where everyone's just chatting in there, like, does anyone have contact details for people at this paper? Or, I'm trying to get work experience here. Can somebody help me out? Or just approach people, who work at that organisation and ask them. It's really not hard to guess email addresses and formats and things like that. Cold calls don't hurt.
Good tips then.
Yeah.
Okay, we've had a whole heap of questions about the difference between doing an MA in journalism and doing the NCTJ, and then a couple of questions specifically around City being a good uni for the journalism postgrad. So I wondered if you could both just sort of chat about your experience of postgrad life a little bit more in the NCTJ and the MA, and what people can expect from those and how to get in.
Bree, do you want to take NCTJ? Because I think that's probably still the most common one and the one people talk about the most.
Absolutely. So the NCTJ I chose because it was a lot cheaper. I was kind of considering, all or nothing. I was like, if I do an MA, I might as well do it at City. Otherwise, is there much point? I might as well just do the NCTJ. So I ended up doing the NCTJ because it was a lot cheaper. Also, it was so much faster. And I know that like Kit will probably tell me that I'm wrong about some of the preconceptions I have about the MA, but the NCTJ was 3 months. And, so I graduated in July, started in September, finished in December, and was doing work experience. And in my mind, I was working towards the 2015 election as being the point at which everyone would be hiring. I was like, if there's ever going to be jobs in journalism, it's going to be in the run up to an election. They're only one every 5 years. Little did we know it was going to turn out to be like the most turbulent time in British politics ever. So yeah, I just wanted to like cheap, quick, out the door, get the certificate, get on with it. And it was really good. It was very sort of local paper focused, and I sort of knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. I might have been being a bit snobby about it. Just again, my heart was set on like national politics. I wanted to be in the lobby. So that was the only sort of downside of it that I found, that I was like, it was very geared towards people that wanted to pursue that career, and I knew that I didn't want to do that. But in terms of the sort of base level skills, they're all the same in terms of like how you write copy and media law, and it's really useful to have that kind of sort of similar building blocks. So learning court reporting, even if it's not something that you're ever going to want to do, you might end up doing it.
And I think as well, NCTJ is still the benchmark standard, and a lot of print publications and online publications will still ask for NCTJ, and sometimes they say or equivalent, but they still ask for, NCTJ, the National Council of the Training of Journalists, is still the sort of, it's run by, you can do it at lots of different outlets. Was yours at Journalism Works, based in the local paper?
Yeah, it was in Brighton as well, so it's a big plus.
Yeah.
Basically just saw it as extending my uni experience.
Yeah, so loads of different places can do them. Some are unis, some are much more like colleges, and you can do the NCTJ there. And like you say, it can be much quicker. I did the MA because, or an MA, there's lots of journalism MAs. I did broadcast journalism at City. There are lots of different journalism courses at City Uni and other unis, Goldsmiths in London. Cardiff is really well regarded. The MAs at Cardiff are really well regarded. So that's obviously a year-long or 9-month-long course, and it's different. It's less of a training course, I guess, and it's more of a 9-month sort of probably more theory as well as the training. Some of the downsides of an MA, it costs a lot more. I don't know how much your NCTJ cost, Bree, but my MA was at the time I think $9,500. It's a lot more time out, not working or working part-time, and some MAs are not accredited by the NCTJ, so you're not getting an accredited qualification. Now mine at City was accredited by the BJTC, which is like the broadcast equivalent of the NCTJ. So my big tip would be, if you do a journalism course, be it an MA or a shorter course, make sure it's accredited by somebody, be that the NCTJ or the BJTC if you're going for a more broadcast focused course. I regret, for example, on my year-long masters, I never learned shorthand, which I know you do as part of the NCTJ. So there's pluses and minuses of both, but I probably did a lot more broadcast training on my MA than Bree did on his NCTJ. Hope that's helpful.
Thanks. And someone's asked a follow-on question about these two, and we'll take this and then we'll ask about some of the stuff. So Millie's asked, anonymous attendee and Millie have asked about how competitive it is to get into either program, and like, have you got any tips?
Into the MAs or the NCTJs? I
think people would like to know both.
Yeah. So just to start off with the NCTJ, mine cost, I think it was $4,000 at the time, but it was like $1,000 off if you paid the lump sum, which I was in a position to do because I worked all through uni, and they actually given me an extension. Anyway, competitive, not particularly in my experience. I think they're kind of keen to get as many people as they can. There were people there who were like 17, hadn't gone to uni yet. There were people there who were 50, I think, who were sort of considering a career change. So they came from like a whole range of backgrounds, quite non-journalistic, I sort of felt like I was one of the people who had the most experience in terms of like running a student paper for a year or 2 years. So in my experience, not massively competitive, but I know that it's there are, you know, really big ones that are slightly maybe more competitive.
I found, very similar to me. I found City actually, even though it's one of the well-regarded MA courses, I didn't find it very competitive at all. There is obviously a competitive process, but my experience is that these unis make a lot of money from these courses. It's a sad reality, but compared to doing a medicine MA or a law or something, it's probably a lot cheaper for them to run these courses. So high up managers probably want to get as many people through the door as possible, and that's just a really sad reality.
Great tips. I think you've got one more sort of top tip slide that you want to share, so I propose we do that and then we just go to more questions, if that's okay with you both.
Yeah, sounds good. So where are we up to? Are we up to the transition from student media to media? Or maybe I didn't do that slide.
Don't make the same mistakes we did.
Oh, don't make the same mistakes we did. There we go.
Jesus, 20 years younger.
Yes, mistakes, Bree. Mistakes.
Mistakes. What did we write on our carefully crafted notes? I think
that was my comms officer photo. That's what that was.
I put don't put student media before yourself. You know, constantly sort of doing the managerial aspects instead of the journalism writing aspects. You know, in my bit. Do more sort of radio and telly, again, not because they were things that I wanted to do, but just because I think they would have given me, it would have been better to have some experience rather than no experience, and you use, you know, the time to be doing those things. Sort of try and learn as many other skills as you can. I'm very aware of like what the generation underneath me coming up is probably going to have as a given. You know, social media was our big thing. We were like, we know how to tweet, we are the shit. You know, like that is no longer going to be the shit for much longer. Like you're going to have to be ready for young people to like come in and like know how to produce so much more sort of slicker, cool video content on TikTok, and doing other things like sort of data and coding. So like keep as broad a mind as you possibly can and be humble and be ready to like be worried and like, you know, use that to like feed your energy to learn new stuff. Don't get too complacent. 2 more quick things from me, sorry. Don't pick battles with absolutely everybody. I think it's been unique to my experience. But you know, student media, student politics, they can sort of feel like the be all and end all of everything. And sometimes they're really personal, but you know, there's a big old wide world out there where you know, things that feel important to you don't matter, you know, in the grand scheme of things. So try not to let them sort of feel too overbearing at all times. And the final thing was, as I sort of briefly mentioned earlier, to keep the contacts you make. Making a spreadsheet of contacts just before I left my previous job with all of the sort of email addresses and stuff and telephone numbers was one of the most useful things I do. I now keep it updated all the time, you know, with contacts I make now, but I wish I'd started when I was a student.
I'd really echo that tip. I only started doing that since I started at Sky, and I've actually retrospectively gone and tried to add from old notes, you know, contacts I made on the City course and stuff. But is that your iced coffee? That looks good.
Oh, it's really nice.
But yeah, I mean, I personally use, actually I won't tell you what I use because you might try and hack into it, but I use an online contact management system. And yeah, store all my contacts in there, update them regularly. It's all GDPR compliant in case anyone legal's watching. But yeah, a way to have access to your contacts where, you know, wherever and when you go between jobs is so important. In terms of mistakes, when I left my undergrad, I was of the view that I shouldn't have to do a postgrad journalism qualification. I've just spent however many £1,000s on my undergrad. I've done all this amazing student media experience. Why the hell should I have to now do another qualification? So I tried to get a job in local radio. I couldn't get enough shifts to make it pay. I did shifts at heart, but couldn't make it pay. And then I went into PR. So I worked for an NHS trust and I worked for a police force in the press offices. great experience, but it did set me back in terms of starting properly full-time in journalism by a few years. I gained loads of other additional experience, and I actually talk about those experiences a lot in interviews. But one thing to consider is if you want to really get going and be on the Forbes 30 under 30 by the time you're 29 and a half, you haven't got many years, as I'm now discovering, counting down the days to my 30th birthday. So, do you know what I mean? In terms of varied experience, I think is really good. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a mistake, but I'm saying just think about that in terms of if you really want to sort of, go off the edge of a ski slope onto your journalism career.
Well, we've got 5 minutes to rattle through.
Right, sorry, questions. Yeah, let's go.
Right, I'm stopping the share because it's always nice to see your faces as you answer all these questions. Jo Walters, who I believe you both know from your time at Sussex, I feel like she bossed you around or the other way around. And Jo's asked, what surprised you about real journalism versus student journalism?
Can I pitch in here? I think how mean some people can be. Like, when you're a real journalist, you're not as sort of protected, and you can't give the sort of excuses that you are sort of young and inexperienced than a student, if any of those things are true. I think there's a bit more cover once you're a real journalist. Sorry, that sounds very patronising. I didn't mean it to be. Once you start working for an organisation, then there's a lot more responsibility there, and people will write nasty things about you on Twitter, and complain, and there are lots more sort of legal consequences. So just sort of be ready for that kind of that real level of responsibility that you have to have once you sort of move out of the sort of protective student journalism sphere.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think it's a lot more fast paced. I remember when you were working for a weekly paper, Bree, at uni. I was doing, when I did news for the station, we recorded one news bulletin that ran all week. The hell, you'd be bored of that bulletin by the end of the week if you actually listened to more than one student radio show a week. But and now when I'm doing my radio news reading at Sky News for the, so I have sort of two main jobs at Sky News. I read the radio news for IRN, or I do some TV reporting shifts as well. But if I'm reading the top of the hour bulletins that are going out to commercial radio stations, they change, every hour, and we're writing copy, and that line is old, and within 3 hours that top line is old, and you're onto the new top line, and you bang, bang, bang. So the churn of it is so much more fast-paced than student journalism. I think the media law point is a really important one, and knowing your media law is really important. And actually, yeah, that's a much more bigger gulf. And as Bree sort of mentioned, you've got to know the stuff, because you might be, yeah.
I had a sort of quite steep learning experience. My first job at HuffPost, I still sort of treated a bit like, oh, I'm still figuring out how this all works, and oh, it is fine to make mistakes here, and they reached the point where it's not. And there was a real steep learning curve. When I went to Sky and I felt the platform and the responsibility was so much greater, and I was like, you are not allowed to cut a single corner here. There is no messing about. This is serious stuff.
And also, not everyone gets it right. Just in terms of learning curves, there was a court story recently that I was reporting on for Sky News on TV, and the Press Association copy, our lawyer decided had overstepped the mark. So the stuff that was coming down on the agency wires, could be argued was breaching media law. So, if the Press Association can sort of get it wrong or push the boundaries too far, we all can. So it's kind of, it's tough. It's important to know those things. Scary. Yes, it is, Daniel.
Good tips. Maybe that's why our media law session was just so popular on Friday.
Yeah.
Okay, so Oliver's asked, in student media, how do you get listeners or readers involved and engaged with the content that you're producing? Pretty big question there.
I think I was just looking at that one. My first suggestion is just sort of, sorry, I've got a lot of ice in my mouth. Embed, your writers, your news organisation at every level of your community. Make sure that you're covering the stuff that your readers are involved in, the activities, the societies that they're involved in. make sure they're just sort of like talking about it. Make sure you're distributing your, sorry, I'm going to talk about paper because I was on paper, your paper in the right place where people are going to read it. You know, I don't think we had one in the gym, maybe, for example, and that was probably a bit silly because that's where a lot of students spend their time on campus and might just like pick one up on their way out the door when they're on the bus. Just like make sure that you are as community or like reader orientated as possible, and think like, if I was them, what would I want to see and read? What would make me want to be involved in it, and work backwards that way.
I seem to remember at student radio, we kind of, when I was on the exec, we decided that there wasn't a presence for the radio station on campus. So we just tried to do loads of events. You know, we started doing quiz nights at the bar. We started doing DJ nights at the other bar. We started, you know, getting really involved in Freshers Week events, you know, having stands in the main square on campus. And because we knew not many people were probably listening to the station in their uni halls or whatever, we just tried to sort of build it as a sort of a community and a campus brand that was doing other stuff, which kind of got the message out there and sort of increased engagement and people getting involved. Because there's two aims, isn't there? You want people reading the student paper or listening to the student radio station, but you also want people involved, getting involved in the outlet as well.
Don't be afraid to ask people, like, you know, just go and stand in your like university. We had like a square in the middle of it. Just go and stand there and ask people and be like, hey, I work for this paper. Do you read it? Why not? What would make you read it? Just take some feedback that way. I'm sure you'd get like some very quick answers pretty quick, you know.
On that, a couple of your bits of advice were about like being physically in a space, and unfortunately a lot of universities and colleges are going back in September and October, and they'll be virtual, and so lots of students will be not actually physically in the same town as some of their peers. Have you got any tips for finding stories or news whilst not being like on campus, or being able to like go to the uni bar or whatever?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, there's loads of like sort of online groups and stuff like that. One of the ways we used to find stories was like TweetDeck, and just having loads of columns, filtering words and phrases, you know, and sort of specific locations and things around there. That's a really easy way to find news and just sort of drum up ideas. Yeah, Kip, anything?
And as Bree mentioned in one of your earlier answers, data journalism is so important now. So if you can, you know, if you can do a lot of that journalism from your laptop, whether it's analysing stuff the uni has published in terms of data sets, whether it's putting in freedom of information requests to local authorities or the university about how they've dealt with COVID-19, getting access to documents, you can do all that from your laptop, and you can chase FOI requests from your laptop. Do you know what I mean? So doing that that's building your skill of data journalism and sort of freedom of information journalism and that kind of stuff as well. So try and do some of that, I think, while we're not able to overhear some bit of gossip in the uni bar or whatever.
Also, just one final tip on that, like it's like the age-old bloody classic of media, which is like nick other people's stories. Like, just go and look at other student media websites and see what they're doing, and then go and find your own angle on it. Like, if they're like, oh, you know, library fines have tripled over lockdown because people can't return them, just go and do the same story at your uni. Like, use theirs as inspiration. I'm not saying like nick their story, nick their copy, but like, take their ideas. That's you know, that's what happens. Sharing good practice.
There's a session on Friday that if anybody missed on this that might be interesting, that Jim from Wonky, which is a news for higher education website, Jim shared 10 HE stories that you might be missing, and that was all pretty much on that kind of data journalism and looking at university finance committees and that kind of stuff. So there's a recording of that will be available next week for anyone who's interested in that kind of thing, and lots of stories that you could be producing now while there isn't a load of student stuff happening. I'm going to change our angle a little bit and go back to that kind of careers employability thing, if you're okay to answer a couple more questions. So someone has asked about whether being a successful journalist is about luck, essentially. So do you think success for a young journalist really is down to being right place, right time?
Well, I think Partially, but to just sort of seem a bit cliche, you do to a certain degree like make your own luck. If you can put yourself in those right situations, then that helps. Or people can't all the time. That's a big part of it. But you do kind of have to just throw yourself as far as you possibly can into it. And some of the work experience I got from like going to events, and they weren't in, I was studying in Brighton and they were in London, so I had to like pay for the travel and stuff like that. But sometimes it's worth it. And I would say that actually, like, journalists are actually quite nice and usually quite willing to help people. So if you do ask and you don't get a reply, it's probably not because they're idiot or mean. It's probably just because they're busy. But it means that if you ask them again and you caught them at the right moment, then you get through to them. So there's some luck involved, but I think you can definitely like put in a lot of effort.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, a story I often tell is that during my year at City, there was a careers talk one evening at about 7 p.m. on campus, and we'd all been drinking in the uni bar since about 4 p.m. And, I was under a lot of peer pressure not to go to this careers talk. But I was like, no, I'm going to go. And actually, when I left, about 6 others came with me because they're like, oh, God, if he's going, then we've got to go as well. And the little sort of networking session after the careers talk, there was a guy from Sky News there who'd been talking at the careers talk. And I think that interaction I had with that person there, when I literally went up to him, I sort of necked a glass of cheap, warm white wine on the little table, walked up to him and said, right, how do I get a job at Sky News? That short interaction, I think, helped me get my job, basically. So, yeah, that was luck, being in the right place at the right time. But, yeah, actually bothering to go in the first place is important as well.
Thank you.
If you're ever feeling lazy, just think, like, what am I really gaining? Like, 1 pint, what is that? You never know what opportunities you'll get by just, by chancing it. So take every single opportunity you possibly can. But I'm sure you guys already know that.
Got a bit of a tricky question for you both, and I'm sure it's it's a big one, so we're not going to be able to pick this apart completely because it would take hours to do, but let's have a go. So it's generally perceived that journalism is very white male privileged, etc. Do you think this is starting to change, and do you think there are sufficient opportunities for people from more diverse backgrounds to get a foot in the door?
Definitely can't, kind of slag off any news organisation in particular, but I think Sky does like a pretty decent job, generally speaking. There definitely should be sort of more opportunities across the board. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts without saying anything particularly outrageous, Kit.
I think journalism as a whole has a real problem with diversity. I think in the sort of summary that the question gave about white male privileged, I think the privileged part of it is a real issue. Obviously, the race and the gender and all the other aspects of diversity, but the fact that a lot of that there's so many barriers to entry, whether that's getting a postgrad qualification, whether that's work experience not getting paid, whether that's living in the southeast of England, whether that's being able to come to London, whether that's such a barrier of entry for so many people across the country, and that's a real issue. Lots of bigger media organisations are trying to do a lot to fix it. Lots of sponsoring bursaries at journalism colleges. Lots are changing the way they do recruitment to try and address that, not having names on applications, not seeing CVs, doing different types of recruitment processes. So there's a lot going on to try and address what is an inherent problem in the system. But it is a real issue. And but that's why I guess student media can be a great way to showcase new talent, which maybe isn't from the southeast of England, isn't from a background which makes up the majority of journalists, and is a way of sort of getting being able to sort of break through and stand out. There's some really good apprenticeship schemes that the big media outlets run, which are designed to attract people who might not have traditionally come into a job in journalism. So there are schemes out there, but yeah, it's a massive problem. And I think all media outlets admit it's a massive problem, which is a shame, but they are trying to do things to address it, I think.
Just 10 seconds quickly, if I can add, like, political journalism is obviously like one of the worst, like the lobby. I think you saw at the Downing Street briefings, like there were basically just zero BAME people asking questions. There's like 2 non-white journalists that I can think of. So if anybody sort of, from those backgrounds and sort of really wants to kind of get into political journalism, then like somebody's DM'd already, like, mine are open, feel free to just get in contact and I'll give you whatever advice or help or tips I can. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's something that NASTA, SRA and SPA are interested in thinking about and working together on this year, so should be some interesting moves this year. Kit, you mentioned apprenticeships. Someone's asked a specific question about Sky apprenticeships that I wondered if you'd be able to give them some tips on getting a reporter's apprenticeship with Sky.
There is a reporter apprenticeship scheme, I think. There's a Sky News apprentice as well, which recruitment was just open for earlier in the year. One thing that I'd say is, I don't know if Bree would agree with this, but in terms of like managing expectations, like, some of these big media outlets like Sky that only have, there's one Sky News apprentice a year, and I think one reporter apprentice, but they're not even every year. BBC Journalism Trainee Scheme, I applied for that about 4 times. There's like 10, roles a year on that. The ITV has a traineeship. There's about 5 roles up for that. I applied for that about 5 years in a row, didn't get it. So these really big ticket ones, your chances of getting it are very small. That's not to say you shouldn't apply, but I applied to all of them several years in a row and didn't get anywhere. Also, when I came out of my postgrad, I think I had unrealistic expectations of how quickly I was going to be doing broadcasting. I worked at Sky News for about 2 years and didn't do any broadcasting at all. I was a producer. Then I started doing some TV stuff for the tech show that we did. Then I started doing some radio news reading. Then I did an attachment on the TV reporter rota. So even if you get a job in a big media outlet, you might not be doing the job you necessarily want to do for quite a long time as well. That's not very helpful because it was about apprenticeships we started on there, but there are apprenticeships, apply for them. Get in touch with people at the organisation before you apply to see what they're looking for, what their aims and their goals are. But yeah, just be aware of the chances.
And I know the previous, I think, Sky News apprentice fairly well. So if anyone specifically wants to talk to them that's applying for the scheme, I'm sure they'll be happy to help. So again, DM, whatever you need, just get in touch and I'll try and link you guys up.
Thank you. If you've got time, we could probably get through maybe 2 more questions. We've luckily not got another session after this on this stream, so we haven't got to boot everybody out straight away. So someone's asked, and a lot of people have voted it, how prepared are you for starting a journalism career if most of what you've written is opinion pieces and comment articles?
Actually, this is a really good point, because I was on an interview panel for a Sky News job recently, and a comment that came up about, okay, actually, no, I shouldn't talk about that because that's about a recruitment process. Rewind. That's a really interesting point, but there is a general view sometimes that some people, especially in radio, some people want to be personalities, not journalists. And you've got to be really careful about your work experience at uni, that you try and, especially in student media, that you vary your experience. So whether it's only writing comment pieces for the student paper or only doing like radio music shows where you're the personality, if you want to go into journalism, they're not that useful experiences necessarily. Bree might disagree on the opinion thing. From a radio perspective, if you want to be a radio newsreader, a radio journalist, you need loads of show reel stuff and audio show reel stuff that is news reading and is reports and is interviews that you've done. Bree might disagree on the opinion pieces.
I think, no, I mean, I'm broadly very similar, just like, we are sort of that age now where you read stories about MPs saying stupid shit that like gets dredged up 10 years later, but which they wrote when they were an adult. I used to like have a little blog that didn't say anything particularly controversial, but probably definitely would have voiced some political opinions that, you know, I might not necessarily agree with now. So that is all. I shut that down. For the last month, I have been like going through every single tweet I've sent since I set it up and deleting, you know, ones that I'm like, would I really want, you know, somebody to be able to question my like independence if they sort of fished up this tweet from when I was at uni, like, well, a few years ago, and like, oh, well, you wrote this about, you know, this political candidate or whatever. So I think like, do be really careful. It's not hard to delete things and shut them down, but you've got to do it now. And it's fine to sort of experiment and like find your voice and have political views, but just sort of always be aware that like, if you write it and you publish it, then somebody's going to be able to access it.
And someone's asked, which is a really good follow-on, as a journalist, how important is it to build that social media following on Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or Instagram now?
Well, Brie, you have far more Twitter followers than me. So how do you do it? Where are those extra 6,000 from above mine? That's what I want to know.
Are you counting?
No, I'm not counting.
Sounds like there might be a bit of competition here.
I found it quite useful, again, because the job that I wanted was like a political journalist in the lobby. It's about, you know, like knowing people, getting in with a very, very small, close-knit crowd, and sort of breaking into that's very hard. So like, I literally remember like posting a screenshot of when a political editor followed me on Twitter when I was at uni on Facebook and being like, oh my God, it's the best day ever. So I personally found it really useful, and it sort of just helped me like build my own, I'm not going to say brand obviously, but like, you know, who I was as a person, like maybe slightly more authoritative, and you know, it sort of helps create that impression that you should be taken seriously and that you're part of, you know, somebody who's like a proper journalist to be respected basically. But I don't think it's completely essential, but I think it is useful to have like at least just an online profile, even if you're not kind of like sharing your stories and stuff like that, just sort of something that, you know, you bases you in the digital world.
Do you know any? Sorry, I was going to ask. Do you know any?
Go for it, Rosie.
Do you know any successful journalists who don't have a very big online presence?
Definitely, but I think they tend to be old school people who have like had fantastic careers and who are known, and you know, have had the platform to be able to sort of build it up because they are, you know, the political editor of a Sunday newspaper, so they don't need it because, you know, what do they need Twitter for? They've already got their jobs. But I think if you want to kind of break into that mold, then it's useful. Not completely essential because it's sort of, yeah, I can completely understand why it's not for everyone. But, you know, it doesn't have to be Twitter. You know, you can have your LinkedIn or some other sort of profile and things like that. You know, whatever you think is sort of meaningful, and that people who are going to be looking to hire you or people who are doing the same job as you want to do would sort of look at you and go, oh yeah, I see they've got this kind of online profile.
Mm-hmm.
And some jobs actually ask for it now. On the job ads, it says, you know, I've seen a few job ads for journalist jobs now that say has a active, you know, social media following. What they count as active, God knows. But I think the Breeze point that you make is really important. I think it's a lot easier to get a really active follower base if you've got a specialism, and that's hard when you're starting out in journalism. Like the sports editor at Sky News Radio, he's got a huge Twitter following, but that's because he tweets about football all the time, and he tweets from football matches and tweets about interviews he's done. You know, Brie, you tweet a lot about politics. When I'm doing general news stuff, I might be tweeting about going to the zoo, doing a report on that one day, and then the next week I'm talking about, I don't know, you know, something really serious, and so it's harder to sort of be consistent. That's my excuses for having a small Twitter following.
I think for conferences like this as well, we always ask for people's Twitter bios or LinkedIn, because it helps somebody to understand like who you are and what you're about and the sort of stuff that they might find interesting. So I don't think it's essential, but it does help with your profile building, doesn't it? We are at time. So I'm going to pause the questions now, but invite everybody to join us over in the coffee shop. And Kit and Brie, you're super welcome to join there. If you've got another kind of 5-10 minutes, it means it's a little bit like a meet and greet after a conference session where someone comes up to you and says, oh, that was good, thanks, can I connect with you on LinkedIn? A bit of that might happen. and lots of people find that really interesting. But it's also an opportunity to continue with the questions and pick up on anything we haven't got through. There's been loads of questions, and we've got through lots of them, so thank you both for getting through so many of them.
Thank you, everyone. And as Bree said, my DMs are open on Twitter as well. So if you've got any specific questions about anything we mentioned, please do DM us both. But yeah, I'll head to the coffee shop as well. Sounds
Great.
good.
So if you're both heading over to the coffee shop, I will close this recording down now and this session down now. Thank you both so much for being part of the festival and for spending an hour and a bit with us on a Sunday afternoon. Very much appreciated. And thanks for answering all those questions, and see everybody over in the coffee shop in a minute.